Wonderful. Hi, everybody. Good morning.
Morning.
Wonderful to see everybody's faces.
Morning.
Welcome to the last of our Thursday morning sessions. We'll shed a tear at the end because I know it's been fun for us and I think helpful for all of you. So today we're going to be talking about a series of Lorrie Brubacher's articles that she wrote for the newsletter in 2012 and 2013, across sort of autumn and spring and summer in those years. So I'll kind of get into that in a little while. But for now, just to say hi, welcome. We'll deal with some of the technical issues in a moment. We're recording this session, so it'll go on YouTube afterwards, and you'll be able to pick it up again if there's anything else you want to see again. Just a couple of quick things. Obviously, we're going to be talking about EFT. You might have questions. You might be tempted to talk about particular cases. Please don't. Because it's going on YouTube, it means that it'll be there for, for a while. And it's always possible that clients can go to YouTube and look at these videos. So we want to make sure that everything's confidential and that people wouldn't recognize themselves. So just a little kind of warning there, please keep specific client cases out of it. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to turn off your screens and mute yourselves. So maybe you could do that now, and that helps with the bandwidth, and it means that, everybody gets a good picture and sound. And what I'm going to do right now is share my screen so that you can see my very plain old PowerPoint here. So I'm going to share that, and if I can do it, I'm going to also pin my video so that you can just see me. There we are. Okay. So there we are. All right. What we're going to do, Helene is going to monitor the chat. Thank you very much, Helene. So you might have a question about something that we're going through. So please feel free either to, when we get to a sort of a pause point, to unmute yourself and ask the question, and put your camera on as well, because it's nice to see you when you're asking the question. But if you're not into that, and if you don't want to do that, just put the question on the chat and Helena will interrupt me or talk about your question in the pause. This is a very kind of a meaty article, I'm sure you'll agree. Recognizing and following markers, and it's by Lorrie Brubacher, who obviously is a trainer in the EFT community and the author of this wonderful book, Stepping into EFT. We did look at chapter 5 of this book the last time, and interestingly enough, if I'd have been smarter and quicker, which I'm often not been during lockdown, I would have noticed that the article was later developed into chapter 9 of this book. So if you want to sort of see where she went with it after she'd written the article that you've read, go to read chapter 9. It's actually a really great chapter. It pulls in a lot of the stuff that's in the article, but it also develops it a little bit more. So that said, we're going to look at the article now. And I really, really like this article, or the series of articles, mainly because it's very, very, very practical. So as I understood it, as I read it, it sort of takes various pieces of EFT, of the EFT journey, and it looks at markers of specific things. In other words, kind of signposts. Lorrie uses this metaphor of these inukshuks, these stone sculptural markers that guide travellers in the Arctic landscape. And this is a lovely metaphor for what we're trying to look for in EFT. But not only does she in this article talk about markers, like what to look for, she actually tells you what to do when you find these things, which is so beautiful and so practical. So that was the reason I picked it, because, you know, oftentimes when I'm working with people in supervision, they, you know, people are kind of pretty good at sometimes picking up stuff, but the question always is, okay, now what do I do? You know, what do I do with that? So I think this article really answers some of those questions. So just before we get started, you know, anybody want to say anything about the reading, just the article in general, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it? So just let's pause there and unmute yourself, and just let's take some general comments before we dive in. Easy to read, hard to read?
Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Hi. I just thought it was like gold dust. It was like, it was so rich. It was the idea of having a roadmap which is that tangible. I just thought it was amazing. Yeah, so I was so grateful that you signposted us to it and that you encouraged us to read it. Yeah, I feel enriching for the experience already. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, that's the way I felt about it, actually. I came across it and I thought, wow, you know, this helps me. It helps me know what to do, which is really, really good. I can't think of any other word than helpful. Sorry, I'm playing about with the screen.
And Sarah, Sandy G says, I also love the practicality of the article. So helpful to have markers named so clearly and specifically.
Ah, fantastic. Yes, I totally concur, Sandy. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what's happening here, but I'm having trouble with my PowerPoint. Give me 1 second.
So I just wanted to add that I totally love Lorrie's work and the way that she does the markers and things. And to have a document like this, it's like, it's gold dust, and it's also, in a sense, kind of overwhelming, because it's like, there's so much that is so amazing in it. And it's kind of like one of those things where you want to consume it all, and yet to really get the best from it, you kind of have to stop and savor each part and think about it and apply it to your client work, and not rush on to the next one. Otherwise it just becomes it just all merges in my head then, and it all becomes useless because there's so much there.
Yeah. No, I get that, Sandra. I mean, interestingly, some of the questions that I put together were sort of, you know, highlighting that, you know, here's something about all of these markers in this particular stage of EFT. Now, which are easier for you, which are harder for you, because there's so many to think about, you know. So I totally get what you're saying there. And, you know, maybe it's in our reading, maybe it is about also slowing it down and slicing it thinner to talk about, you know, your more recent group.
And Sarah,
yes,
Nicolette also backs up what Sandra was saying. Is really helpful to have specific couple interactions in mind.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I suspect I will go back to this article or chapter 9 in the book again, you know, maybe once we've fleshed it out a little bit, and I probably will read it again with that kind of focus. So that makes sense. I know when I was reading it, different couples were coming to mind, and actually, interestingly, I had a supervisor that I was working with, and we were talking about a case, and then I read something in here, and it just perfectly captured what that person was struggling with, and so I sent her the paragraph. So, you know, this is why I think it's so useful and so practical. Yeah, okay, so let's crack on and have a look at some of the questions. And what I've done this time is I've got less questions, because what I was noticing in the other reading groups is that I had loads of questions, and we would get to about 10. So this time I just had 10 questions, so I hope we won't run out. But also I think it might give us a little bit of time. You may have your own questions that got thrown up by reading this. So I really would value if you got to a point in the article and you had a question and you just couldn't noodle around it, throw it out here for us today, and we can all try and help each other to sort of figure those questions out. So please feel free to do that today. So the first part of the article is looking at verbal and non-verbal micro-process markers. And before we dive into the question, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what those mean. And I'm actually going to read from the book. The book is really kind of a carbon copy of the article. So, and what Lorrie says, I think she says it here in the first couple of pages, is micro markers of implicit emotion are fleeting and easy to miss. So that's, you know, already a kind of a challenge, isn't it? If they're fleeting and easy to miss. And she says, since EFT therapists know that following emotion is the route to change, they're constantly seeking to notice and follow signs of emotional experience. So that's, I think, really what this article is about. You know, it reminds us that we are process consultants as EFT therapists. And what that means is that we're looking for and watching the process. It's not necessarily about what somebody says, it's about how they say it. This is really sort of where this article comes into its own. And so, you know, she talks about non-verbal micro markers of bodily arousal might be subtle movements such as pulling back, a tightening voice, a slight shrug, or grander gestures such as a broadly sweeping arm, chopping hand movements, a deep sigh, a sudden gasp, or a blank face. So markers of those bodily arousals indicate that attachment fight, flight, or freeze system is activated. So that's just an example of some of those bodily markers. But I guess the thing that caught my attention on page 2, in paragraph 2, was this phrase, process replay. And I just thought, oh yeah, that's an interesting phrase, and I think I know what it means, but I just thought I'd throw out, what do you understand by make a process replay? So let's unmute if you want to, or put something on the chat. What's your story? What's your idea about make a process replay? The context is soft, simple, slow, explicit tracking of these markers is the first and fundamental response towards creating more secure connection. Reflect what has happened, make a process replay, evoke with risk, and use evocative questions to access different elements of emotion. So what do you understand by make a process replay?
Reflect what's going on in the process.
That is short, sweet, and simple, Nick. Yes, good. Thank you. Yeah, it's really that, isn't it? It's replaying what just happened, step by step, what happened in the process right in front of you, either within the client or between partners. And I think there's an example here in the text. The blood drained from your face as though you feel frozen stiff when XYZ happened. I think it's about slowing the process and replaying the moment. So it's definitely anchored in present process, which is probably the most important thing that we're doing in session. Yeah, go ahead.
And Sandy has, Sandy has a comment, go back and go through it again, slow it down and pay attention to all the aspects of what happens.
Yes,
I agreed, slowing down and going through what just happened. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice way of saying it. And I think the thing that catches my attention about Sandy's comment is going back to it. like going back to it, because sometimes, like Lorrie says, that these things happen so quickly and so fleetingly, it's easy to miss, right? And people kind of carry on talking. And I think we have permission as EFT therapists to sort of say, hey, can I just stop you for a minute? Can we go back to just a couple of moments ago? And there's an example here. You know, when clients begin rambling, EFT therapists respectfully interrupt and refocus on some emotional handle, or make a process, that should say replay, sorry, autocorrect. I'm just going to slow you down here, all right? A moment ago, your voice quivered as you said to him, do you really mean that? That's from the chapter 9, but that's an example of kind of going back to the thing. Maybe this is something that's quite challenging for us sometimes. I don't know. It took me a while, I think, when I was learning EFT to really focus on process and not content. I think that's a real shift when you can kind of get your mind thinking, okay, not what they're saying, but how they're saying it, or the process of the interaction between the partners. Any other thoughts on this?
Sarah, could I offer something here?
Please do.
There's something for me around it's almost like setting up an enactment that invites real curiosity, you know, revisiting something that's been maybe unconsciously articulated, and for the therapist to say, you know, however, whatever is appropriate, but can we just sort of take a pause and come back to what you've just shared, and to really invite that curiosity, almost to support the holding of what has just been shared outside of the client, so we can all peer into the process, and feel it and get curious about it and find out the significance of it, both to the individual and to the couple.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you. Just a real quick process comment for the meeting. When you unmute yourself, just say who you are, because I can't see you, so it's quite helpful. No. Who was that, by the way?
It's Deborah. Sorry.
Oh, hi, Deborah. Thank you so much. Yes, I love that. And what I pick up from what you just said, which is, I think, quite important, the client may not be aware of the thing that we've picked up.
Yeah.
Right? There's, Lorrie says, it's fleeting, right? It's something that they're doing, but they may not be aware. And our job is to sort of shine a light on that thing that they may or may not be aware of. I love what you said.
Can I put something in?
Yeah, who is this?
It's Mike.
Hi,
Gray.
Mike. Hi.
Hi. When I do that, the shifting from the content to the process, I do try to I'm worried that the person might think I'm disregarding what they said. So I try to put in a bit about that thing that you just said kind of made perfect sense to me, and I understood it. But there's something about the way it landed and the way you said it that produced a reaction. So I try to move from their content and acknowledge it, and then talk about the process.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, Mike. That's so important, isn't it? Because the validation of the actual content helps somebody feel that they've been heard, and might make them more available to your process comment. Yeah, very, very nice. Thank you, Mike. It's really helpful.
And Nick here, Sarah.
Yeah.
I'm just realizing my brain's going, I'm not exactly sure in depth what the word process means. So I wonder if you could give me some extra words so my mind might really get a hold of it.
Yeah, and others feel free to step in here. But for me, you know, those of you that know me know that I'm from a Gestalt background. and in Gestalt, we're looking at how a person does themselves, right? And I think it's similar here. How does this person act in the world, right? And so if I'm looking at that, I'm looking at how they do what they do, right? So for instance, if somebody was sort of making a process comment about me right now, they'd say, oh, I notice that there's a certain tone in your voice when you say that, and I notice you're moving your hand right now, and I notice that as you're doing that, you're also nodding your head, right? These are things that I might not yet be aware of as I'm talking, right? Or I notice that as you say, do you really mean that? Your voice quivered, right? So it's kind of talking about everything that's happening in that moment as somebody is saying something.
Thanks, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's making more sense. I'll continue to sit with it.
Does anybody else have another way of saying that, or something that helps them?
Can I add something? Can I ask something?
Who's this?
Jane.
Oh, hi, Jane. Yes, go ahead.
Are you also reflecting in that moment on your own reaction? Because that's quite subjective, isn't it, as well?
That's a really good question. And I think that the answer to that is yes, because it's inevitable that when you're in a dyadic or triadic relationship with your couple, that you are going to pick up something from that interaction, and you might be having a reaction to something, and sort of that reaction that you might be having might help you to make an empathic conjecture. So because you're in an empathic relationship with your client, let's say as this person said, do you really mean that? I, as the therapist, might have thought, oh, wow, I can sort of feel a sort of nervousness inside as I hear that. And so then I might go back and say, hey, can I slow you down? A moment ago, your voice quivered as you said to him, do you really mean that? And I wondered if there was some sort of nervousness there for you. Right? That would be a way of kind of bringing that in as an empathic conjecture.
Yes.
So I really like that question. Thank you, Jane.
It's Richard here.
Hi.
In response to Nick's question, what was occurring to me is that a message from one person to another is like a multi-layered message. It's got a contact layer. It's got sort of what the impact of that message is, both on the sender, what their emotional state is, the level of investment and what their emotional message is, and also kind of how that is received. So a way of looking at the process is looking at not just the content, but all of those different markers about what the sender is feeling and what is co-created in the field, between two people.
Brilliant. That makes so much sense. Yeah, you're trying to sort of notice and comment on all of those elements, or some of those elements. I mean, I think it's quite hard to comment on all of them, but you might be commenting on the poignant ones, the things that feel to you like they're very attachment focused or attachment meaningful or emotion meaningful. So yeah, that's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
Nick here again, just to finalize for me, is there a word that carries the same meaning but equally weighty in terms of meaning, but it's a different word? Because I noticed my brain likes contrast to really get something. Is there another word that describes what process means?
Can I come in?
Yeah, please do. Yes, because my brain was going, I'm not sure. So go ahead, Helena.
So I guess I could give it with an example, Nick. This is Helena. Yeah. So I have a supervisor that often says to me, are you aware of your process around that? let's say I'm talking about something to do with something I'm struggling with a client, right? And the question will be, are you aware of your process around that? Another way of saying is, are you aware of your pattern of thoughts, what goes on for you inside around that? And so I often think of process as really the elements of emotion, right? What am I saying to myself in that moment, right? What's my pattern? What is it I'm wanting to do in that moment, right? What am I concluding? So it's been really helpful for me to think about it as, what's my pattern? Not just my internal pattern, but my external pattern. Like, what will I tend to do in that moment when I'm having that struggle with that client or with that, you know, intervention or whatever? What is my process? What goes on inside me in my head? What do I feel? It's really like, you know, your pattern in terms of the elements of emotion. I mean, I don't know if that helps.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Helene.
It really reminds me, and it will, this has been quite, I did not know when I put this question here how rich the conversation would be. So it's been a really, really beautifully rich conversation. But it does remind me, just to kind of pull all that together, that what we're trying to do in EFT, and you've probably heard this phrase 1,000 times, is we're trying to make the implicit explicit. So when we say, a moment ago, your voice quivered as you said to him, do you really mean that? We're looking at a part of that process of emotion that Helena is talking about, and we're trying to make it explicit, right? Because the quivering voice was part of that experience, but it may not have registered explicitly with the client. So we're trying to kind of pull that together as an element of the whole experience.
There's a comment here in the chat box. Do you want me to read it?
Go for it, yes.
It's Nicolette saying, just thinking about process image, the tell in gambling. Google says a change in a player's behavior or demeanor that gives a clue to other players of that player's assessment of their hand.
Yeah.
I am not a gambler. Okay.
No, that's lovely. That's lovely. It's the tell. Yeah, I like that. So this is great. Lovely, lovely, rich conversation. Thank you, everybody. So hopefully we're getting a kind of real sense of what process means and what a process replay means. So now we'll move on. We're going to look at something on page 3, paragraph 3. One of the most difficult things to handle is the client who, in quotes, veers away from the leading edge of their experience. Which of Lorrie's suggestions feels most helpful to you? So just to kind of recap on the suggestions. Hang on a sec. Oops. Sorry, I'm really useless with this technical stuff, guys. I have to tell you. For some reason, it doesn't want to move my cursor on. So I'll just wait and let it catch up. So the suggestions that Lorrie makes are, where are we? When clients give rehearsed descriptions with a tight, seamless quality and there seems to be no way to enter the client's experiencing, be transparent in observation. Use tracking, an evocative question, or make a process replay of what has just taken place, or find a metaphor to conjecture about the client's core experience in the cycle. So here's some examples. You describe that really well. And as you describe what must have been very difficult, I find myself wondering, what must this be like for you? So that's some transparency and an evocative question. Or here's another example. Several times when I've attempted to ask you how this is for you, you've kept right on talking. So there's some transparency and just tracking what's been happening. And then she carries on, almost like you're feeling an urgency to get every detail out before your story is crushed. So that's a conjecture based on the cycle. And then she says, when clients begin rambling, practice respectful interruption. Probably one of the hardest things for most of us. I'm just going to slow you down here, okay? and refocus on some emotional handle or process replay. And this is the example we just heard. A moment ago, your voice quivered as you said to him, "Do you really mean that?" When clients speak in vague general terms with flat or distant descriptions, use immediacy of language, shifting the vague to the vivid, the general to the specific, the abstract to concrete, the global to the personal, and the then to the now, using emotionally evocative language. To a partner who relentlessly avoided emotion and spoke incessantly, the therapist says, "Do you feel anything as your wife says, 'I can't take the loneliness anymore'?" He replies, "Feel anything? You should see me when I go to Dieppe." The therapist replies, "And it comes up here again when she says, 'I can't take the loneliness anymore.'" So brings it right into the present. So there's a number of really lovely suggestions from Lorrie. So I guess the question is, which of these feel more helpful to you? Sorry, there we go. We've just got some of these ideas here. Are there any that you tend to go to more often than others? Are there any new things here that really kind of spoke to you?
Sandy here.
Yes, go for it, Sandy.
It was a revelation, the one several times when I've attempted to ask you how this is for you, you've kept right on talking. And then a reflection, a conjecture about why that is. That felt like, oh, yeah, I've not thought of that as a way of acknowledging that that is happening, kind of in a way giving a reason for interrupting.
Yes.
And then checking out that conjecture, which itself brings it back to the process and the emotional underlying thing. Because even if it's not true, it's in the right direction and they're likely to correct it to how it is for them.
Beautifully said. Yes, I really like what you said. And I love that it was a revelation, right? Because it's so nice, isn't it, to be able to, with these kind of challenging sort of situations, it's so nice to have something that you can do. and I think the big thing, and I in our Manchester externship, Helena did a live with a couple, and the thing that I just really thought was beautiful, Helena, that you did was the transparency and the tracking. I mean, over and over and over again, I noticed you do that, and it was so helpful for the client. It really gave them something to kind of hang on to. So thank you, Sandy. I really, really like that. And that transparency and tracking, I think, is really important, because that's when you're referring to the process. Yeah. So Sandy, you're going to do that lots now, right?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Anybody else? Any other thoughts about some of these ideas?
It's Richard. When you say make the implicit explicit, it'd be really helpful just to say kind of what the value of that is.
Yes, good question. So again, I from my training, I have this phrase that I use, which is awareness equals change. Right? It's hard to change something if you're not aware of it. So if I'm reacting really quickly to something and I don't know what's going on in my body, for instance, somebody can say a word and I just quickly react to it. If I don't know what's going on behind that, then it's really hard for me to change it. So making the implicit explicit is helping people to become aware of all of the elements of the action or the reaction in the cycle, the secondary emotion. I don't want to just know about the secondary emotion. I want to help them know about all of the different elements of the emotion process behind that. Does that help? Because they can't change it if all they keep on doing is the secondary reaction.
Yes, yes, I suppose it helps organize, it helps give more information as well
Exactly.
to reappraise, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you know, most of us don't really. People don't tell us how to organize our emotions, do they? You know, who sits down with you when you're a kiddo and says, "Hey, you know, this is how you organize your emotions." Most people don't know how to do that, how to teach that. You know, we're lucky if we get a secure attachment figure, as we said in the first session of this, who can help us feel that it's within our grasp. You know, that secure attachment helps us do that. But if we haven't had that, or if we've not been able to feel it's within our grasp, then it is very disorganized often inside. So making the implicit explicit is helping us to organize. It's a really nice way of saying it. Thank you, Richard.
And Sarah, there are some nice comments in the chat box. We've got
lovely.
Mavat says, it's really simple, bring it into awareness.
Yeah.
And Deborah Mitchell says, particularly with passive aggressive behavior, holding a mirror up to the process.
Lovely. That's a nice way of saying. I love metaphors, so that's perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Elena. That's lovely. So yeah, hopefully there's a couple of new ideas here, which kind of link us to tracking and transparency and process. Let's move on to the next question. Oh, this is a good one. Really, really tough. So this is from page 5, paragraph 3. This is talking about validating secondary emotion, and it talks about here, anxious partners have more diffuse absorbing affect. They tend to be flooded with exasperation and unclear, overwhelming worries. They're highly reactive, typically enraged at their inability to get engaged responses from their partners. Underneath the reactive anger is mounting fear and panic that they're not important to their partner. They need a therapist to validate the secondary reactive affect, such as rage towards a defective partner, before the therapist can very slowly unpack and expand this affect to access primary desperation, loneliness, or fears of not mattering and abandonment. To do this, the therapist intersperses evocative questions with focused interruptions, validations, and reflections. So the question is, what are the biggest challenges for you in validating the secondary emotion of an anxious reactive partner? Ooh. And I'm just putting some things here that, oops, done it again. Oops. Oh my goodness. Hang on one sec. Okay, so here's some of the suggestions. Evocative questions. What happens inside of you just before your voice rises and you insist that he drop everything and listens to you? So that's to evoke the flash of primary emotion that happens just before the reaction. Brief, focused interruptions. I'm going to slow you down right here just before you said, I just can't stand the silence. I noticed you took a quick peek at him and tossed your head. Can you tell me what you saw? And that is the purpose of that brief focused interruption, is to evoke the cue or the attachment meaning. Frequent validation. This is really the essence of the question I'm asking. I completely understand. It's frustrating when his silence says to you, he doesn't care. And the more you try to get him to sit and listen to how far away he seems to you, which is the action tendency, the less he seems to listen. And that's the cue in the cycle. That's a validation of the frustration making sense. And then reflections. You say to yourself, if he doesn't want to sit and talk, I guess I'm just not that important to him. So these are some ways that, we would kind of deal with a anxious reactive partner. What are the challenges for you in validating the emotion? I just kind of put some of mine, I brainstormed with myself, you know, that they'll ignore me and just keep going. that's a maybe a kind of a thought or a belief that I might have that would challenge me. They'll feel justified. If I validate them, they'll feel justified in the blame that they're giving to their partner. That might be one that would be a challenge. That my validation wouldn't make any difference. I suppose that's the same as the first one. Like the avoidant, I would worry that the avoidant withdrawing partner will feel I'm siding with the anxious, critically pursuing partner. These were just some ideas that I came up with. But what are your challenges, do you think?
So, Sarah, there's a lot of comments coming in the chat. Do you want to hear some?
Go, please, go for it.
It's not quite directly related to what you're just talking about, but Jane asked, is it possible to help children organize their emotions? And Sandy responded that it's kind of done mainly implicitly by how they're responded to. That was just regarding the last one. But the question you asked right now, the biggest challenge is, Andreas Tibbet says, concerned about causing a rupture in the therapeutic alliance by interrupting. And Sally says, getting the balance right in terms of reflecting back and validating content so that the distressed client feels heard, acknowledged, and not getting swallowed up by the story. And Karen Wallace says, you know, the partner will feel blamed.
Yeah, these are all really sort of real things for us, aren't they? You know, they're the things that go through our head when we think about validating the secondary emotion. But I don't know if you know, one of the things that came up for me as I was thinking about this question was this idea of sort of trusting the process. And trusting, you know, if we really truly kind of buy into attachment, if we trust that the alarm bells that are going off for the anxious partner, if met with validation and some level of soothing, will kind of quieten down. If we truly buy into that, then we might say to ourselves, okay, validation will help here. And we might want to talk a little bit about what validation actually is or means in EFT. It's not just agreeing with the anxious critical partner. It's trying to help put their reaction into context, right? So just going back a little bit, think about this validation here. I completely understand it's frustrating when his silence says to you he doesn't care. So that's the context, right? No wonder your alarm bells would go off if you thought your partner doesn't care about you. And the more you try to get him to sit and listen to how far away he seems to you, the less he seems to listen. No wonder your alarm bells would go off at that point. So that to me is really what validation means in EFT. It's not agreeing with them. It's putting their secondary emotion into the context of an attachment, fear, or longing. So I really like your challenges. How does that sit with you when you think about validation in that way? Oops.
Right, can I just, negotiators call that tactical empathy, I think.
Ah, nice.
Might.
Yeah, tactical empathy, yeah. I can understand why you're standing on that ledge with a gun. It makes sense that you're feeling so alone and that nobody loves you. Yeah. That's the kind of negotiator I was thinking of, the hostage negotiator, but they've got the wrong end of the stick.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Anybody else?
And Mavat has a comment. She says it's about appreciating and valuing their vulnerable parts and invite for more engagement. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to this whole making the implicit explicit, doesn't it? Like, we know that in that moment when the frustration is happening, that that's not the only thing that's going on. We know that inside there's something else going on. We just like go in with that knowledge. There's something else going on, and we want to help make that something else a bit more explicit within that context. Yeah. Thanks, Mervat. That's lovely. Anybody else?
It's Greta here.
Hi, Greta.
Hi. I think one of the things I find difficult is actually having to feel quite forceful sometimes in slowing down a very anxious, agitated client. And I sort of, there's a fear in that for me that they might be feeling overwhelmed by me in that I'm not heard.
That I can see that makes sense. And as you were talking, that it reminded me, I don't know whether any of you've seen the video of George Fowler, who's a trainer in New York, and he's in one of these iHeart Therapy talks with Annabella Bugatti, and they're talking about highly escalated pursuers, and he talks about meeting the energy of the person. Yeah, because I know what you.
And it's necessary. It's necessary, but then you kind of quickly got to get into a softer place.
Yeah.
In order to.
Yeah, it's almost like you would sort of like meet the secondary response. I completely understand. It's frustrating when his silence says to you, he doesn't care. You know, kind of, almost like modulating in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a challenge.
That's a challenge for me.
For me. Yeah.
Has
anybody got any ideas about that? And the same challenge, or how to sort of be forceful in a risk kind of way, or another way?
I think it's always, Mary Claire here, that piece of not getting caught into their overwhelm. You're conscious of the pursuer. I mean, this whole kind of thing that's going on, and staying firm in that, but equally not putting anybody. It's such a delicate balance, I think, is what I'm trying to say. Not to let anybody feel blamed. I think that's such a difficult one, and you don't want to shame them into slowing down, but just holding them and getting that very fine balance, because as you say, you just don't want the validation to feel like you're siding with anybody.
I'm going to let you into another of my little phrases that I carry around with me, which is every behavior makes sense in context. And if we sort of try and remember that, you might be kind of like, set back on your heels by a highly anxious reactive partner, and your limbic system is supposed to kind of react like that. But then if you can ground yourself and then come back and say, that's happening here. This behavior will make sense to me if I think about the context in which it's occurring.
Richard here. So what I find sort of supports me is kind of regulating myself, so sort of like longer out breaths, and trusting that my intention, my heart energy is part of the message. So that helps, in terms of, that helps me stay firm.
Yes, I like that very much. I was watching one of the videos on EFT and trauma the other day, and I suppose some of these highly reactive, anxious partners, sometimes there is trauma in the background, or trauma in the relationship that kind of is a precursor to this way of responding. And something Silvana talked about in that video was, the therapist to feel grounded, the therapist to sort of enter a session, where there might be a highly reactive, anxious partner, sort of with some grounding, you know, and then remember to ground during the session, because that really can help you to put whatever you're experiencing into context. Thank you, Richard. That's really helpful. This is a big topic. I think it's one of the ones that kind of gets us all activated. So I really appreciate all of these lovely comments and suggestions.
There are,
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, there are more comments. Do you want more?
Oh, please do. Yes, and then we'll move on.
Okay. So Sally Evans says it's such an art to modulate in the agitated moment, right?
Yeah.
And Mavat says it's like someone is all over the place and asking them to come and stay here and now. Sometimes very difficult. It looks like I am as a therapist don't care.
Mm.
And Jane says using a calm voice yourself can help.
Mm.
And Mike Gray says, I sometimes find myself giving the withdrawer pep talk before validating the pursuer.
Oh, I like that. Yes, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. You're kind of all when you're doing that, you're sort of maybe putting it into context too. Yeah. Great. Wonderful comments. Thank you all so much. I'm looking at time and I'm noticing, even though I only have 10 questions, we're only on number 4. So there we are. But let's take number 4. Let's have a look at the next one. So this is an interesting section, isn't it? Like tailoring interventions to attachment strategy. So this is really the whole section between page 4 and page 6. So the question I asked really was, you know, she's talking about, you know, we might want to do different things for anxious versus avoidant folks in the sessions. We might see different things happening. We might hear different things being said. So my question is, what do you notice in this section about the differences in markers between anxiously attached and avoidantly attached partners? And just in general, I mean, this is a sort of general idea. The markers for avoidant tendencies are usually in sort of indifference and distancing. You know, I don't see what the problem is. Whereas markers of anxious tendencies are desperateness and pursuing. Why can't we ever sit and talk like we used to? So that's the kind of general idea. But what do you guys notice about differences here?
Hi, this is Dilnia.
Dilnia.
I do notice that in avoidant tendency, they mentioned that, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And they apologized straight away.
Mm-hmm.
But it is long later, I mean, after the other session, it's still the same things has happened, and it became frustration for the pursuer client.
I kind of like what you say, because if you think about a more withdrawing, avoidant partner, their general coping strategy tendency is to be kind of avoiding numbing out. So it would make sense that they might say, I don't see what the problem is, or I didn't know that, because it's not been available to them, because they've been kind of numbed or avoidant of what's going on. Yeah, as a way of coping. Yeah.
It's a way of coping, and it is, but when it has become repetitive, and when the pursuer partner has become so frustrated, and it will come out in a different reactive behavior, like maybe angry or the other person will be going to the withdrawing.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about others? What other things do you notice as markers of avoidant tendencies or anxious tendencies?
I think avoidant, I often notice very reasonable. They have a kind of reasonable argument, which is very distancing. Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more intellectual.
Yes.
Yeah, which is often a way of coping with something distressing, isn't it? Sort of really trying to make sense of it and intellectualize. Yeah. Any others that really kind of like stand out for you? I mean, maybe in the earlier sessions when you're just trying to sort of figure out who's who, what kind of things what markers do you notice?
There are a couple of comments coming up in the chat. Do you want?
Yes, please.
Some of that says denial or dismissing to survive. Sandy G says avoidant defensive body language, slightly turning away, arms crossed. Tim Rice says avoidant clients can sit in a particular way, maybe with leg crossed away from the partner or arms crossed, might lead to questions about why. And Maggie says, I have noticed avoidant tendencies, change the subject and make excuses such as work, family members, etc. Mike Gray says, one of the big ones for me is withdrawers looking elsewhere in the room. And Sandy says, for the pursuer, leaning forward, emphatic.
Yes, yes, emphatic. Oh, I love that word. Yes.
Yes. And Karen Weller says, I find the anxious doesn't pause for breath, voice gets higher. Yeah. And Andrea Tibbet says, withdrawers often use humor.
That's a good one. Yes, just to kind of deflect almost what's going on. Yeah. These are great, guys. It's interesting. It's I'm noticing that there's more noticing of avoidant tendencies in your comments than of anxious tendencies. It makes me think that anxious tendencies are just right there, really obvious out there. You know, we can kind of tend to see them more clearly, whereas avoidant tendencies might be a little bit more difficult to spot in the earlier sessions. I don't know.
So Sandra here, I just wanted to add, I think the thing that's one of the challenges of it is that you've got both of them in the room at the same time, you know, the nature of couples work. So while with one, you've got the microscope turned up so that you can see things that are often quite subtle. On the other, you've actually had to kind of take the microscope the other way. And in the midst of so much kind of action, you've got to kind of get markers that actually kind of really mean something in this moment for you to pick up. You've got too many, in a sense. It's so kind of vibrant and rich and alive. Whereas the other one, it's like it can be much more subtle. And you're watching both people and their reactions to what the other one does all at the same time. So that's one of the challenges, is that you've got both those radars on at the same time and the middle radar of the relationship.
Yeah, I love that's great, Sandra. It does kind of remind me what a complex system we're entering, you know, when we're sitting with a couple, and we can't do it all at once. But something I really liked from I think it was yours, Sandra, your talk last time, was sort of looking at what's the most. We're focusing in on the thing that feels the most poignant, you know, or sort of in attachment terms or in emotion terms. So we don't have to do everything. We just kind of in a moment we're focusing in on what's the most sort of poignant thing that feels like it's there in the moment.
Yes, and even within that there are choices, aren't there? I mean, you know, one thing might jump out, or it might be that there are different choices. It's like, you know, where we go, you know, different ones of us will go slightly different places, and all of them hopefully will lead us to great riches. But there's no way we could do everything, and a good job that we don't need to.
Yes, exactly. All roads lead to Rome.
Absolutely.
Sarah, there are more comments as well if you want.
Go for it. Yes.
Let me go back up. I think Tim Rice added another one. So anyone who's watching their partner turning towards them, keeping eye contact, is unlikely to be avoidant. And Kate Hall repeats, you know, the lack of eye contact, lowering the head, moving the head away. Mike Gray makes a comment. Part of it is that avoidant behaviors are more socially acceptable, like looking around. And Deborah Mitchell's come up with one that I think is, you know, easily missed. Withdrawals are more likely to shift into dissociation and look spaced out, frozen, right?
Nice. Yeah, and I'm really noticing how many of your comments are about these sort of non-verbal micro processes that Lorrie talks about at the beginning. where we can make we might be able to make a process replay. I notice as she said that right here, you turned away and it looked as if you wanted to be somewhere else, you know, something like that. You make a process replay. Yeah.
And in terms of struggles, Karen Wallace says, I struggle with 2 anxious, highly charged people to get in. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah. We're in the middle of a in the States they call it a 3-alarm fire. We're in the middle of a 6-alarm fire, and we have to sort of somehow calm the system down. Yeah, that's not easy, is it? Yeah, go ahead.
Some will be, you know, the most obvious will be the partner talking over or talking for the other partner, or grabbing even a cigarette.
Whoa, that's a new one.
Yeah. Or say, oh, it's my time to take medication.
You notice this in some of the online sessions. Yeah, I can imagine. I just wanted to sort of flip back to, you know, in that case, again, to what I was watching in the trauma video, and Silvana says it's really important to stop them and slow it way down. And the phrase she sort of used was, hey guys, can I stop you? I need to make sense of what's happening for each of you. There's so much going on. Can I just stop you and slow you down so we can make sense of all of this? So, you know, I think one of the things that if we'd have been doing more of these, we might have had a very specific session on highly anxious pursuers or high conflict couples or something like that, because I think it really is something that we most of us would like to know about and talk about. So we might come back to that. So let's have a look at the next section, markers of present moment emotional experience. I guess we've been talking about this sort of all the way along. There are a lot of markers here in pages 7 to 9. Strong emotional responses interrupt the story. A partner is incongruently unemotional while recounting a story with a seemingly powerful emotional impact, that sort of mismatch. Emotionally intense beliefs or rigidly held appraisals are stated as facts. Attachment issues are identified only as a problem with the partner. Powerful but conflicting emotions are present at the same time. This is what Hazel was just talking about. Markers of attachment significance in the replay of the last fight. Repeated stories of pivotal moments or sore points that have obvious significance for one partner seem unimportant or confusing to the other. So with so many markers, you know, which are you most likely to catch? Which are you least likely to catch? You know, what kind of happens for you with some of these markers? We'll open the floor. I think the ones that are harder for me are the strong emotional responses interrupting the story. You know, maybe one person becomes overcome or the other, you know, emotionally interrupts the other partner while they're telling the story. That's always quite difficult. That one about emotionally intense beliefs or rigidly held appraisals are stated as facts. That's a tough one, right? Somebody's become very kind of attached to something. The examples here are, he feels like he's so perfect and I can't ever get him to hear me, so I have to stop trying. She never knows how I feel and I know she doesn't even care. Nothing can ever change because I failed to be the husband she wanted and now nothing I ever do can make it up to her. That's a tough one, a little bit harder to deal with. So I've shown you mine, so you know, you show me yours. Yeah, any thoughts here? Any general comments about this section about markers of present moment emotional experience?
It's Bethan here. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Bethan.
One of my struggles has been when I've had a couple when one of them has had very rigid beliefs, and has had very rigid expectations of what a relationship would look like, and hasn't been able to move from that place for a significant length of time, and even with a lot of validation. So that's quite tough, really, because I guess that there's a frustration for me around, but this is your relationship. It's not. It's the relationship that you're creating together, rather than a very rigid belief of what something should look like. And of course, then having to manage a lot of disappointment because it doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
So really, really hard to work with that.
Yeah, it's funny because I immediately go back to my little phrase, every behavior makes sense in context, right? So there's a reason there for whatever, rigidly held appraisal is going on there.
I mean, for me, I think I think it might be fear, and so that's where I tried to stay really with the clients, but I could only imagine it would be fear. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually all, most of the time to do with safety, isn't it, and security.
Yeah.
So if I believe these expectations are the right expectations of the relationship, then the chances are that I believe those will make me feel more secure.
Yeah.
That just off the cuff, that's where I would go. I mean, to me, it's always about safety or security or danger and insecurity.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
But I hear you. It's sometimes quite hard to sort of process that with somebody that's holding on so tightly to this as their way of feeling secure. Yeah. Anybody else?
Mary Claire here. I'm just thinking of doesn't know names obviously, but a situation, and he goes very rapidly back to failure and shame, and so quickly goes there, and it's really, and then trying to hold him and keep him in the room.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you because again, I know it's very generalized as you're talking, but I want to make sure that we, nobody can identify themselves. Thank you so much, though. I appreciate what you're saying. It's very much about that rapid, if somebody goes,
I think the rapid drop back to a familiar place, and how hard it is as the therapist to sort of keep them where you are, as opposed to losing them.
Yes. So we slow down again, don't we? We kind of say, hey, can I just noticed something happened right there. Can I slow you down right now? Can you help me?
I think that attachment message, the fear, I mean, just holding the loss, which is really what's so present in the room.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Every behavior makes sense in context. Yeah.
There are comments. Would you like to hear some?
Please, yes.
So Mabat says, looks like context is not seen, not valued, not respected. So I put it in the context of a cycle.
Ah, very nice. Yes, of course. Yes, back to the cycle. Always, always, always. Yeah, kind of talking about that. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, and Sandy G says, sometimes I'm taken up by the emotion itself and taking care to validate, but then can miss adequately relating it back to the attachment frame, right?
Yes, that's so important, isn't it? Yeah, it's kind of like a 1-2, right? We validate the emotions, and then like that's one, and then we bring it back to the attachment frame. 1-2, Yeah,
that's nice, nicely put. And last but not least, we've got Mavert again saying, when it is rigidly held, I find it very difficult. Sometimes it is a personality, or what chances of moving on? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy, and sometimes it takes a while for people to feel safe enough to, you know, talk about more vulnerable things. The need for that security with something so rigidly held is so powerful, because, and the chances are, context again, maybe somebody has never really ever felt safe. This is the only thing that they can hold on to that makes them feel safe, and we might just be able to say that. You know, that's an important piece. Yeah, good, nice comments, guys. We'll just take a couple more questions. You know, maybe I'll have got through 7 by the time we finish. Who knows? So next is about responding to interactive markers in de-escalation, and you'll notice that I skipped a big section here. 10 to 14 is stuff we've really covered before, so we've flipped straight to page 17, paragraph 2, and the question here is, partners get, this is one of the most interesting ones. Marker 7 in this interactive markers in de-escalation. The marker is that the partners get the cycle from a cognitive meta level, but remain removed from the impact of the cycle on their partner and themselves. How would you actively intervene to foster engagement of each partner in their own experience and action tendencies? That didn't come out on the slide. So yes, I think this is such an important question. It's often one I get in supervision. You know, partners seem to get their cycle on a cognitive level, but they don't have a felt sense of it. So, you know, we're trying to actively intervene to foster each person in their own experience and action tendencies. Has each partner actually accessed a felt sense of the primary emotion? They might know it here, but do they know it in here, just before the reactive behavior takes over? So, oops, sorry. Yeah, so how would you do it? You know, when somebody's talking really cognitively about the cycle, how would you help them move into that felt sense? Do we know what we mean by felt sense? Maybe somebody can tackle that. What do you understand by felt sense?
It's about feeling it in the body.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it for sure. Yes.
For me, it's about people going to the kind of feeling of something, which is often in the body, and staying with it rather than using their heads to kind of describe or make sense of. So, you know, this would be a time when I would be really slowing down and slicing thin, because it can look like, oh, they're de-escalated because they get their cycle.
Yeah.
But not de-escalated if they haven't got it in a really experiential sense.
Yeah. Yeah. You're wanting them to have a whole body experience of the primary emotion. Not necessarily in a sort of stage 2 sense that they're right down in the basement, but at least they kind of can understand that element of their emotion process. Yeah. And I like what you said, Sandra, about just keeping them there, just keeping them there for a moment so that they get what it feels like, because they're very often jumping out of the felt sense in the cycle. They might feel it for a fleeting moment, and then like literally a millisecond, and then immediately the reaction comes. So letting them stay there in a very kind of safe way. Yeah.
It's the step 3, isn't it? It's like,
yes,
you can sort of almost like skip it if people are quite cognitively astute without noticing.
Yeah.
You know, and then people will say, oh, you know, we're in stage 2 because they've got it. But you've got to kind of dip them down in that step 3 into the experiential sense of.
Yeah. I often think of that step 3 as it's like a precursor to the step 5. Like if they haven't already gone there a little bit, then it's going to be really hard for them to sort of dive down in step 5. Yeah.
I suppose it's Richard. I suppose a nuance of that is actually it's being able to fully identify with the feeling, to be really in it, but also to disidentify it so that you're actually you're resourced enough. It's not like you're fully in it. You're able to sort of like hold two positions at once. You know, so you know it fully, but you're able to disidentify from it.
Yeah, you're reminding me, Richard, of Sandra's talk and the window of tolerance. You know, getting them sort of just a bit to the edge of the window, but not so much that they sort of spill over the edges. But they might actually have quite a wide window and not really have been at the edges of it. So the felt sense is getting them to that sort of edge of the window of tolerance. Yeah.
Sarah, would you relate the felt sense as a gut feeling or their sixth sense? You know, something that they are feeling within themselves? Would you relate it to that?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's all about what is the experience in the moment. And if there is either of those elements that you've mentioned, then that's part of the experience. Okay. So I would like them to sort of be able to name that and organize it a little bit in order to, describe their experience both to themselves, the fullness of their experience to themselves and to their partner. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And
thank you.
It. And also just that for me, when I'm with a client, them going to their body so often, kind of going, where is it? Where can you feel it? And usually kind of sitting with clients, I can see where they feel it, or I feel it where they feel it. And
yes.
Kind of go into it, so putting their hand on it, just really sitting with it, but gently, so that they don't kind of get overwhelmed by it, but just noticing.
Yeah, I like that, Kate. It's and what it reminds me of is that for many clients, when you ask them to do that, or when you direct them in that way, that may be the first time they've ever really started to pay attention to that or notice that part of their emotional experience. And so it has to be gentle, it has to be careful and safe, because it's something that they might have avoided or disowned for a long time. Yeah, I like that.
And I think as a way in, I would want to validate their intellectual understanding of it.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful, Greta. Yes, so important. It's a little bit like, you're validating that, because that's kind of a secondary response, isn't it? So you're validating that secondary response in order to help them feel safe enough to feel the felt sense.
Yes.
Yeah, very nice. I like that. Yeah. I'm thinking we might...
Do you want to take a question?
Yes, go for it. We might sort of pause there and then take this question and then start to wind down. Go for it.
Yeah, there's a question from Andrea. She says, could you use the idea of pause to help them make sense?
Oh, that's a great question, and I would say absolutely yes. Yeah, and we probably, I'm sure we've covered this in some of the talks, but somebody's experience can be sort of divided into parts, if you like. I have I remember the idea of somebody who says it's like anger and sadness are sort of together, they come together for me, and I might say, well, yes, of course, I mean, it makes sense, this is how you've always experienced it. It's like a part of you feels really sad and then another part of you feels angry all at the same time. Can we just kind of look at those in turn and see what they feel like, So that kind of parts work is quite important, actually. It goes back to that idea of like the ball of rubber bands inside, and you're trying to sort of take out the orange one, and take out the red one and take out the green one and just kind of look at them and taste them just a little bit, because before you do that they're all kind of jumbled up together. So the idea of using parts is really quite important. Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Any other thoughts or questions on the chat?
Yeah, so there are thoughts or comments like, what did we say? Maggie Merrick says, I think this is a time to slow right down and wonder what it is like to feel this example in the body. A wondering of what it could feel like. Mavat says, just understand and stay with real primary emotion before manipulated cognitively with brain.
Yes.
And Karen says, precise awareness, focusing by Gendling.
Oh yes, yes, that makes so much sense. I'm sure most of you know about Gendling and focusing, but it's a really lovely way of helping people to just sort of look inside and notice and kind of start to become aware of different parts of their felt sense. For anybody who's not familiar, his book, just called Focusing, is quite a small book, but so rich in terms of helping to understand why focusing is important, and some ideas, some words that you can use to kind of help people move into that felt sense. So maybe we can send that out, or send a reference out when we send the video out. Yeah.
And Sandy G says, it's their internal sense of the leading edge of their experience felt in contact with themselves in the moment.
Perfect. Yes. Yeah, lovely. And I would add also, maybe that they are unaware of. I mean, they're feeling it, but they're unaware of it. So our job is to help them focus in and notice. Yeah.
And I was thinking, Sarah, that, we've been talking a lot about process today, and which is very much the how, how things are, how things happen. And I like to think of the felt sense as the what it's like. Right? So that's very much on the what side, like, yes, you feel sad, but what is it like? What's that sadness like? It's the what of it. What is something like?
Yeah.
Because the way I feel sad isn't the way you feel sad.
Yes. Oh, that's brilliant. I love that, Helena. You remind me about some of the ways we might ask about the felt sense. Like that, what is it like? What is it like inside?
Yeah.
What happens inside when?
Yeah.
What is it like to be you when you feel sad? Can you help me understand what happens for you inside when you feel sad? Yeah.
So it's getting the emotion from the inside.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, I noticed that we got 5 minutes left, so I'm not going to take another question, but please feel free to use the rest of the questions, to have a look at and go back over. Some of them are about looking at stage 2, which we haven't got to. We've many of the questions that we've looked at and the comments that we've talked about are appropriate both in stage 1 and stage 2, but some of these markers later in the questions very specifically talk about stage 2 bonding events, step 7 reaching, step 6 acceptance of the partner's fear and so forth. So do have a look at those, because I think that they can be quite helpful just to delve into a little bit more. I'd like to ask you, I'm going to stop sharing if I can figure out what the heck I'm doing here. For some reason there we are, stop share. And put your cameras on and unmute yourselves so that we can just take any final comments. And then we'll say a fond farewell. So anybody want to say anything, about how they feel at the end of the session? What's been helpful? or even not helpful, and then we'll say goodbye.
It's been very, very helpful, and I'm very grateful indeed for your time and the fact that you've been doing this. It's been brilliant.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to
Kudos to Sandra and Helena as well, of course. We're all involved here. Yeah.
Well, it's really generous of you, and it's been invaluable to me. I find it so helpful. I feel I'm growing in my work. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm very grateful for everything, and I'd like to bless you. That's all I can say. You know, like, thanks for everything. I've gained a lot of knowledge, and my eyes are blinkered. I'll be going in there and, you know, being in the process with them.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hazel. Thank you. Well, I know that there's some thank yous in the comments. I'm sure on behalf of Sandra and Helena, I can say we would like to thank you for turning up and being so very engaged in the material that we've presented, and just very, very thankful to have such a brilliant EFT community in Britain. And I don't know, Sandra, Helena, do you want to say anything as we sort of finish up this series?
Well, the same as you. Thank you all for taking part. It's been such fun doing this together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah,